Hey, you guys. So we're finally getting around to talking about this iconic cult film.
The movie's a masterpiece.
The film that birthed a million old internet memes. Every time you see that very famous meme of like the drawing of the face that says "you don't say" on it, that's from this movie. That's Nicolas Cage. And this is Vampire's Kiss.
Yeah.
Now, you had never seen this?
No.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe you've never seen this. So yeah, this came out in 1989.
Movie's a masterpiece.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you liked it. I always really, really like this movie. The thing about that, it's not like this kind of occupies like a strange area where it's not really a good movie, but it's a really, really entertaining one.
I think it's good.
Yeah?
I think it's good, yeah. It's just kind of like a Richard Chase type situation where you're not sure whether a guy has turned into a vampire or not. I guess he's crazy. He thinks he's the vampire. But he's having hallucinations that kind of support his belief, but then they show what's really going on. Now, I don't know if it's some kind of psychic attack by a vampire-like creature in another dimension. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, they leave it open to that possibility as well, if you want to go that way.
It might be a vampire attack. It's just that it's just that it attacks you psychically, and most of it is illusion. It could be that. It leaves it open. Or the dude just is a dude like Richard Chase. I think wasn't that his name, Richard Chase, the vampire killer?
Yeah, we did a show about him.
Yeah,
a long time ago.
He was convinced he was the vampire and that he was falling apart and that he had to kill people and drink blood and all that kind of crap. He's a guy like that. Even though he's not a bad guy, he just starts to do a lot of bad stuff because he thinks he's a vampire.
Well, I would argue with you there because I do absolutely think he's a bad guy in the sense that he's just like a raging asshole. Like even before he thinks he turns into a vampire.
He's a yuppie.
Yeah, well, but I repeat myself.
Yeah,
yuppie, raging asshole. Like, especially in the 1980s, you really had all these. I really kind of feel like this movie is almost like the proto-American Psycho.
Yeah,
because
like
American Psycho is kind of like that too, where it's like evil yuppie, but it's like you don't know if he actually did all the shit that I mean. But the thing about Vampire's Kiss is that even though he probably didn't actually get bit by a vampire, by all accounts, he did actually do the rape and the murder, which we'll talk about. So he did actually do the things.
My interpretation is that the kiss of the vampire, the bite of the vampire, it's plausible that it's happening in another dimension. It's like spiritual, and it turns you into a vampire that way. You know what I mean? In another dimension. And then you think you've turned into a vampire, you're actually crazy. But you might be. It's just, you got to see the movie. He's got some plausible deniability. He's definitely not a vampire in the way that he thinks he is. But it could be that the vampire mythos is based upon dudes that this happens to, where it's mostly notional.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. That's the way I was interpreting it. It's like, here's another way of interpreting a vampire, a case of vampirism, is that you're imagining it, but it did happen to you, though. Something happened to you.
Well, the thing about it, I think the kind of, what they're trying to get at with the movie is that Nicolas Cage's character, who in the movie is named Peter Lowe, and he's like this literary agent. Like you said, he's a yuppie, and he seems very lonely. Like, he lives alone. He's just goes around, like, with one-night stands and all this other kind of stuff. And he seems a little bit, like I said, very isolated, kind of self-loathing, but he's also like really, really just all he's worried about is work and like, getting ahead in his job and stuff. And he obviously has some issues because he goes to a therapist. But I think that the issues that he has, particularly the issues that he has with his isolation, the issues that he has with women, it kind of like mutates into, these little things, insignificant things happen, like toward the beginning, like he takes this girl home for a one-night stand and like a bat gets into his apartment, and like little things like that start happening, and it almost kind of like triggers something in his head where he just like has this full-blown psychosis, which maybe would have come about in a different way had that bat not come in there. It would have like expressed itself completely differently.
Or it was a psychic attack.
Yeah, like I said, that's a totally valid interpretation.
That might have been the vampire.
I think you're meant to, I mean, you're meant to believe that none of this stuff really happened. Like, he didn't really get bit by a vampire. Like, they do kind of give you clues that didn't happen, but at the same time, they did kind of leave it open so that if you wanted to think that he got bit by a vampire, like, you could totally make it so he did.
I mean, he's tripping, you know, and he's going through all the damn vampire fucking tropes, you know. He's even turned the damn couch upside down and made a coffee. He comes in and out. And he buys fake, really bad vampire teeth. And he's eating roaches like Renfield.
Oh my God!
He thinks he's a real winner. He thinks he's a real winner, but in reality, he's basically a homeless bum walking around. It's fucking funny. Although he never really goes homeless. It's just that the inside of his apartment looks like $1 million. It's an apartment worth millions of dollars. Even
because
back
it's set
then
in New York City. Like
even back
80s,
in those days, in the 80s, it would have been worth millions of dollars. And it looks like a homeless person lives there. It's just rubble and shit. He even dies by getting a stake driven through him. You know what I mean? It's just fucking funny.
So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, because he thinks he's a vampire. He thinks that's the only way he can be killed. So to me, it is a vampire story. This fits all the tropes of a vampire story. It's just that, what would it really look like if vampires existed? It would look like that. And that's the fucking funny part. You know?
I mean, can we talk about Nicolas Cage?
Oh, he's fucking great in it.
Yeah,
Cages the fuck out.
When people talk about, I think he's at peak Cage in this, like at least until the Wicker Man remake.
Yeah.
This one, when people talked about crazy Nicolas Cage, and I'm not saying he's not crazy in other movies too, but he's been like relatively restrained in some other films. But when people talk about crazy Nicolas Cage, this is probably the movie that they're talking about.
I got a lot of respect for Nicolas Cage.
I do as well.
He'll be in anything. I think, you know. I think he had a bunch of IRS problems he had to clear up. I don't know if he's cleared them up by now.
I mean, that's because he made a lot of money, but he spent it on dumb things usually. Yeah. He bought castles and a crocodile and like just crazy shit.
Handle money, all right.
Just crazy shit. Shrunken heads.
But like, you live and learn. You know. But
or you don't.
But he'd be in anything. But he never telephoned that shit in. You got what you paid for when you hired Nicolas Cage to be in the fucking movie. And he's been in some great movies and he's been in some piece of shit movies. But even if in a piece of shit movie, you got your Cage's worth. You know, yeah. You're like, okay, all right, he's doing what he does. Recently, his best one would be, I would say, Mandy. And Color Out of Space is pretty good. Some people didn't like Color Out of Space, but Mandy's a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah, Mandy's great.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
But
most men never have a movie like that in their career. They wait a whole career to have a movie like that. But I loved Mandy.
I mean, well, like I said, you have to respect Nicolas Cage for, like a lot of times he would pick projects just because, he needed the money, which, like I said, it's a job, so, that's what you do. And he's not, like, the best with managing money, which, again, not everybody is. But, I mean, when you hired him to be Nicolas Cage, he'll be Nicolas Cage, and he just seems to have a really good time with it, and he really seems to be having a good time with the utterly bizarre acting choices that he made in this movie. But the thing about it is that if this movie had not had Nicolas Cage at its core,
it wouldn't have worked.
Would anybody even remember it, really?
No, he made this.
I kind of feel like this. I mean, and I'm not saying like the other actors in it are good. Like Jennifer Beals is in it.
Yeah.
Maria Conchita Alonso is in it.
Yeah.
Like there's other like Elizabeth Ashley is in it. There's a lot of like good actors in this, but the fact that his performance is so out there is really what makes people, really like still talk about this movie to this day. Why there's so many quotable lines, so many quotable scenes. He just decided for whatever reason that he was just gonna completely go for it. And it's just really, really entertaining to watch.
Another good one he did lately was the one where he didn't say a word through the whole damn movie, just fought the damn animatronic monsters.
Yeah, Willy's Wonderland.
Willy's Wonderland. It's another good one.
Yeah.
You want to see that one. That's good.
But yeah.
The Pig was good.
Yeah, I liked Pig a lot.
Anticlimactic Pig. Yeah.
I mean, and he was restrained in that.
Yeah.
But like I said, I mean, if you're talking... And Nicolas Cage was actually quite young in Vampire's Kiss.
Yeah.
I believe he was only 24 when this was made. He had made some movies before this, obviously. He was in Valley Girl. And I think Raising Arizona came out like the year before this. So he'd been in like some big movies and stuff. But this was kind of like, I'm not entirely sure. You know the accent that he does in this?
Yeah. That's his yep.
I'm not sure like what I saw somebody else, like maybe it was on like the Wikipedia page or something. They called it like his quasi Transylvanian accent. I don't even think it was that. I couldn't figure out, was it British?
He was trying to sound like a yuppie.
I guess
like
so.
from California. Like a California yuppie, like some dude from Malibu.
I guess,
But
even
then-
though he was in New York City.
Yeah, but he was trying to be like he was from Malibu, and but it did kind of go a little when he started to turn vampire. He started to do a little bit of Transylvania on top of Malibu.
I'm
He's
a
just-
vampire. I'm a vampire.
Yeah, he's just. It's just fucking good, you know. He's a fraud. You know what I mean? The character's a fraud, and then this fraudulent character thinks he's a vampire for some reason. I think the movie kind of supports the idea that vampires might be psychic. It might be like a psychic vampire. The fucking bat came in, and it might have been a vampire bat, and it launched some kind of psychic attack on him, which drives you crazy, and you think you're a vampire. And you start acting like a vampire. Or you start acting the way you think a vampire should act.
Yeah,
Which
is
leads to a whole bunch of trouble. And then you kind of lose touch with reality, and then you die the way a vampire dies, with a stake through your heart.
Yeah.
And this might be what happens to vampires. That all vampires might be that. Maybe.
Maybe. Well, I was kind of thinking that. I was kind of thinking while we were watching the movie again last night, I was thinking particularly the scene toward the end where Nicolas Cage is like, in his mind, he's talking to his therapist, like in the office, and he's all suave with his suit and everything. But in reality, he's covered with blood, his hair's all fucked up, he looks like a bum, and he's yelling at a wall, and like sitting there like holding a stake. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder, like sometimes when you're walking around like a streets of a big city and there's like some crazy person walking around, and I'm kind of like, you know, it could be that they're vampires and that's what they're going through right now. Yeah, so this was actually written by a guy named what was his name? Joseph Minion, and he was the same guy that wrote After Hours, the Martin Scorsese film, and so which was also kind of like the same sort of thing, not as extreme as this one obviously, but it was kind of like a black comedy, sort of like a, you know, Streets of New York type of thing. And Joseph Minion said that he actually wrote this story because of his relationship with his then girlfriend or wife or whatever. And I guess they were having a lot of problems, clearly. And he started perceiving her as like a vampire that was like sucking him dry or whatever. Yeah. And so he kind of wrote this really, and he was going through like a lot of depression. So he kind of wrote this about his sort of toxic relationship with her. Like it was like portraying her as a vampire. And I think there's a lot to be said that the movie, it's the reason that I said that the Peter Lowe character, who obviously has like some issues with women, like I said, he doesn't seem to have a girlfriend. He doesn't seem to be close to anyone in particular. He's very arrogant, and he just kind of goes to the club every night and picks up like one night stands, and he doesn't really seem to particularly care about, you know, calling them back or doing anything like that. But then like deep down, like he seems to tell his therapist that all he wants is love and blah, 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 but he can't really seem to handle it. So I think that when the vampire comes into his life, who's actually, her name's Rachel, and she's played by Jennifer Beals. Now, what it is he just sees her in a bar, and I guess he fixates on her because she's beautiful or whatever, and he sort of has this fantasy about, because he likes to be really arrogant and controlling and everything like that, which they kind of get into with his relationship with his assistant, like one of the secretaries. Sorry, that's my phone ringing. One of his secretaries, Alva, who he just mercilessly like browbeats and, you know, shits on like pretty much every chance he gets. So I think that he has this weird thing about the fact that he's surrendering to this supposed vampire, a woman who's kind of like has him under her control, and so it's coming out like in other ways where he has to like assert control again, like over this other woman that's in his office that doesn't have any power and stuff like that. So I kind of feel like there's a lot of that sort of dynamic going on as well, but he's perceiving it as vampirism, almost like, well, she's a supernatural creature, and so I don't have, I can't fight against her. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think there's some of that going on too. But like I said, if you haven't seen this movie, so basically what happens, he's like a literary agent, right? And he works at whatever the hell, I can't remember. I think they say the name of the publishing company.
Yeah, back when you make millions of dollars dealing with books.
Well, yeah, I mean, some still do, because look at fucking people like J.K. Rowling and people like that. They still make bajillions of dollars. But yeah, so he works there, and he's like an executive, and he's a dick, but like it seems like they have a couple scenes like with other executives like in his office, and they're all douches too. Because the one kind of horrifying scene where he actually chases Alva into the bathroom and starts like screaming at her and stuff like that, they all just think it's funny, you know what I mean, even though she's so scared that she's like threatened to pull a gun on him and stuff. So there's that kind of thing. So he's not any more of an asshole than anybody else that works there. But then, like, as his sanity begins to crumble, or as the vampire asserts more control over him, whichever way you want to spin it, he gets more and more like dangerous. You know what I mean? Because the whole thing because a large part of the plot is taken up with his relationship with Alva, the woman at the office, who's played by Maria Conchita Alonso. There's this whole plot point about this client who wants this old contract, and he even says to the dude on the phone, the client says, "Oh, it's not that big a deal. I just kind of wanted it. Like, don't rush." But Peter, Nicolas Cage, he makes it seem like, oh my God, this guy's gonna leave if like he doesn't get this contract right now. So he makes her stay and like look for this contract which was misfiled, and he just like relentlessly like fucking browbeats her about it and like abuses her about it, makes her stay like all night, all this other kind of stuff. So like I said, it gets to a point where she gets so scared she has a gun. It's like, and he ends up actually like raping her at the end, which is horrifying. But that's kind of another thing that feeds into his delusion too, is because the gun that she has, they establish that it only has blanks in it. And so
yeah, there's a scene in here, do not do this. He sticks a damn pistol in his mouth and pulls the trigger, trying to kill himself with blanks, and it doesn't kill him. In reality, that would kill him. It would
still kill you.
Yeah.
So I'm sure like when they were shooting the movie, I'm sure they just used caps or whatever the hell, but because he does actually stick it in his mouth and it does look like it goes off.
Yeah. Do not do that.
Yeah, but seriously, don't do that. Even if it's
powerful
blanks,
as a real round. It's just that there's no projectile in there, but that gas coming out of there will blow a hole right through you. Yeah.
But that's the thing. But so he doesn't know that they're blanks or whatever. Like I said, we're just going by movie logic. Yeah. And so he puts the thing in his mouth and like shoots it off a couple times. And the fact that he doesn't die confirms to him that he's a vampire and that the only way he can be killed is a stake through the heart, because like obviously he shot himself and it didn't do anything. And the other famous scene too was where he ate the cockroach.
Yeah.
And he actually
didn't swallow it, but he did chew it.
He did. He said, I saw an interview with him about it, and he said, well, actually, we had to do that twice. Yeah. And it was his idea.
Dumbass.
They were originally going to have him, like, I think originally they were like, well, you can
edit it and cut it.
You can just have, like, raw eggs or something like that. He's like, no, it should be a cockroach. Because he wanted it to be, like, super, super shocking. And like you said, he might have been making a reference to, like, Renfield type of stuff, like eating insects. Which, to me, like, eating a roach, as gross as it is, I still can't really watch it. But, because it's so nasty. But doing that, like, kind of goes more toward, like, the vampire myth than the eggs would have, I feel like. But, yeah, so basically you're just watching this guy losing his fucking mind, like, over the course. See, I don't know. Like I said, I don't think that she was really a vampire. Because at the end, when he goes up to her at the end, like, when they're at the nightclub, like, after he's after he raped Alva, after he kills that girl in the nightclub, like, with the teeth, and then he sees Rachel in the club, and she doesn't she barely recognizes him.
I don't think she was the vampire. He thought she was the vampire.
And he's like opening her mouth. Look at her teeth. Look at her teeth.
That was just the form that it took. I think the vampire was the bat.
Tom really, really wants there to be a vampire in this movie, and not all of his imagination.
It was just in his mind. It was in his mind. It gave him a form to focus on, and it was some hot girl he saw at the club.
I guess so.
Yeah, he thought it was her. It's plausible that there's a psychic vampire in the story.
Yeah, I mean it's totally plausible. Yeah. But like I said, I always interpreted it as he was just like losing his fucking shit.
I think both. Psychic vampires making him go crazy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And I think that he fixed. Well, I think he fixed it on the vampire thing because of the bat. And then he tells when he's still relatively normal. I mean, he's Nicolas Cage, so he's obviously never normal. But when he's relatively normal by Nicolas Cage standards, after the bat thing happens, like the bat flies in the apartment, he tells the therapist that when the bat came in, like he felt kind of turned on by it. Yeah. But he doesn't really elaborate. And then when she asks him about it again, like the next session, he says he doesn't remember what she's talking about.
Well, the bat might have been the vampire. It was just disguised as a bat.
It turned into a bat.
Yeah, vampires turn into bats, right?
Yeah, I know that.
So it might have been a damn vampire.
Because the thing about it is, like, he takes Rachel home, and I was kind of thinking, well, maybe Rachel, he did have a one-night stand with her, maybe, because she knew his name, like, in the club at the end, and she was like, oh, yeah, like, Peter, right? Like, how have you been? So I guess maybe they did sleep together at some point, like, in the past. But the thing about it is that, I don't know, like, I kind of feel like after that happened, like, the very day after that happened, because he brings her home, and she either bites him or he perceives that she bites him. But the next morning, he's like in there making coffee or whatever, and he brings the coffee and there's nobody there. And he holds the coffee cup out to like nobody. Yeah. And it's clear that nobody's been there.
No, he's crazy.
And it happens it happens like pretty early. Like it happens a couple times where he's like talking to her as though she's like, hey, come in the shower with me and blah, blah, blah. And there's obviously nobody there.
No.
So
that doesn't mean there's no vampire, though.
That's true.
All right, I think that bat that came in was a vampire, and it made him fucking crazy. All right, so then vampire phenomena started happening, but it's all internal. There's no people. You know? And he thought that vampire was that woman from the club, so he's getting very confused. But it's like a psychic vampire.
Yeah, because, like, he keeps seeing her. Yeah. She's, like, talking to him. Yeah. And she comes there and, like, drains his blood all the time.
Yeah, and it's manipulating him and stuff. But that's just the form he chose.
Yeah.
For the vampire to have. But it's not really there. It's like in another dimension.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like something out of Vivarium. They went into another dimension. They weren't there anymore. They were in another dimension.
It's another vampire.
Yeah. So there was a vampire in another dimension.
But yeah, I mean...
Dimension of insanity.
I can't imagine that anybody... If you have not seen this movie, you really have to see it because, honestly, I know there's, like, tons of memes about Nicolas Cage, and there's tons of, like, scenes, and there's tons of lines of this. I mean, probably the best stuff, like, when he jumps up on the desk, there you are! Like, you know what I mean? Like, which was, again, just him doing that. And the scene where he's in his therapist's office and has a fucking freak out about how things could get misfiled. How do things get misfiled? It's like it's alphabetical A, B, C, and he just does that kind of shit. Yeah. And it's just so fucking great. And then he does that fucking thing with his arms. Not one time, you know what I mean? Which he said he actually got from Mick Jagger. That's what he said. And he said that was all very choreographed. I saw an interview with him earlier where he said that because that's probably one of the most famous scenes in the movie. He said, yeah, I've choreographed all those hand movements like for my cat. So like, I'm sure the cat was like horrified, like, what are you doing, Daddy? You know what I mean? But it's just, oh my God, everything in this is just so good. Just like the way, and when he goes to buy the teeth, and I like that he goes in the costume shop and there's this kindly old man who's wearing like a satanic, like a pentagram shirt, which I think is funny. And he shows him these really nice vampire fangs, which are like made of, what were they made of? They were kind of like fiberglass or something. Mm-hmm. And he told him they were $20. And he's like, I don't have $20. He goes, well, I got these cheapy plastic ones for $3.50. And he's like, yeah, give me those. But if you notice, I don't think they made a big thing about this, but I like kind of all these little subtle touches. And I realize subtle isn't usually a word that people use when they talk about this movie. But when he kills the girl in the nightclub, he's actually not wearing those. Like, he was, and then I guess he was trying to, like, gum her, and it wasn't working, so he took them out, and then, like, he bit her and killed her, and then, because you see him, like, slip him back in, like, afterward, because, obviously, I don't think you could kill anybody by biting them with plastic fangs. They would probably just break. So, I like that little subtle touch, but, I mean, when he first goes in that nightclub, and he's walking around with his eyes all big, and looking for fucking victims and stuff, it's just hilarious. I mean, Nicolas Cage, he is just so weird, and I just love that he's just weird, and it's like he doesn't even care. And like I said, if he had not been in this movie, I don't know if this movie would have the reputation that it had, because it's funny, but I think a lot of it, one, it's dark humor, it's a British director, dark humor, black comedy is a hard sell, particularly in the United States. And this movie tanked at the box office. I think it cost only $4 million to make, but it made less than $1 million at the box office and got terrible, terrible reviews. Most people complaining that, you know, Nicolas Cage was like so over the top and he was unsympathetic and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, he wasn't supposed to be sympathetic. He was a jerk. You know what I mean? It's just like the entertainment value came from watching him go completely batshit. So yeah, so this is definitely one of those movies that was not appreciated at the time, but as people saw it on cable and, you know, on VHS and stuff like that, as the 80s and 90s went on, people started to like appreciate it because they're like, oh my God, this is like...
What's great is that it is a vampire movie.
Yeah. There is vampire stuff in it. Like, people do get bitten, but...
It fits within vampire lore.
Yeah. But you could totally read it as there was no vampire ever, you know, and he just was, like, imagining all of it.
Or there was some kind of weird extra-dimensional psychic vampire.
Or there was an actual vampire, but it was just, like, shape-shifting or whatever.
No, it was in his mind.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, like a psychic vampire, maybe. But, I mean, just every single thing... Nicolas Cage just takes all the shit. He doesn't even chew up the scenery, man. It's just like, he just like houses the shit. He's just like all of the scenery, just all of it. But I think that this movie needed that because it's kind of like the premise. I've seen movies with more ridiculous ideas, like more ridiculous premises. This isn't that out there, but I think a premise like this, I think really does benefit from somebody like leaning into the ridiculousness. And I think Nicolas Cage maybe sensed that and said, I'm just going to be as fucking ridiculous as possible, like just with no explanation. Why am I talking in this weird accent? No explanation. Why am I jumping up on this desk like this and like pointing at people? Why am I scatting like while I'm well, you know, why is he doing all this stuff?
What is scatting?
It's when you do that boop ba da boop ba bop bop, that kind of thing. That's called scatting. It's a jazz term.
Okay.
But yeah, so he's doing that. It's like, why is he doing half the shit that he's doing in this movie? Because he's Nicolas fucking Cage, you know what I mean? And you have to think too that this was kind of early in his career, and he was trying to, I don't know if he was necessarily trying to build a brand, but he definitely wanted some attention. He wanted stardom and stuff like that. And he just decided, for whatever reason, this is the way that we're going to do it. And I think it didn't work at the time, but in hindsight, I think a lot of people, this is like their favorite performance of his.
It worked. It's just
because it's just so out there.
It worked. They weren't ready for it.
I guess. I mean, and the thing is, I think he had done Moonstruck, too, like a year before this, which was like that won some Oscars and stuff like that, too. And I think he was relatively restrained in that, or like I said, as normal as he can be. So the fact that this came out, again, black comedy, they don't usually do really well because people are like, well, it's not overtly funny. People don't really tend to like dark humor. It's not like an easy sell. And so it had that aspect, and then it had Nicolas Cage acting completely bonkers in it, and I think people didn't really get it. But people get it now. It was just one of those movies that I think wasn't appreciated at the time, which is kind of a shame. But at least people dig it now. Then, like I said, if you want to see crazy Nicolas Cage at peak crazy, this is probably it. Like I said, until the Wicker Man remake, which is how to get burned, like that, or the bees, that kind of thing. This is along those lines. I mean, just everything in this is just completely strange and wonderful. And it's just such a fun movie, you know? And I'm glad you liked it too, because I didn't know if you liked it at first because you kept like, I don't know, like I said, I can never tell. But then like after it was over, you were just like, man, that was a masterpiece. It's goofy as shit. But yeah, I actually do kind of love it. So yeah, Vampire's Kiss, 1989. Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? Do you think it's funny, or do you just think it's ridiculous? Let me know in the comments. And that will do it for this movie retrospective. We will see you guys on the next one. Bye.